It's Friday night, which means it's time for another episode of the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast. I'm Casey.
And I'm...
Let's keep it.
And I'm Ashli. Last time we talked about angry beavers for the first time in quite a while, and we had a blast getting back into that world.
Yeah, that was really fun. And on that note, we also put out our weekly Twitter poll asking, should you wake a sleepwalker? No, they'll go bahooties, or yes, they're a danger to themselves and others. And no, they'll go bahooties, won out. So we agree with the beaver's parents, apparently.
You know, I think it's the word bahooties. I think it's really just hard to not select an option with the word bahooties in it.
Well, I love bahooties, and I did vote for yes, they're a danger.
Well, look... Maybe you're just more prepared for the bahooties than the rest of us are, Casey.
Probably, yeah. There's not a whole lot to break down in this one. It's yet another nonsense poll, but we had fun with it, and it looks like you guys did too.
Absolutely. And as always, we're going to transition from that fun poll on over to the very serious moments that we have going on here in Avatar: The Last Airbender. We're on episode 6 now, so cruising right along, and this one's got quite a few moments in there that are a little bit more serious than going bahooties.
Right, and even more serious than I think any other episode of Avatar we've watched so far. Maybe not the Southern Air Temple, but other than that.
Yeah, it's up there for sure.
Alright guys, follow us on Twitter at FNN_podcast and Facebook, facebook.com/FNN Podcast, and review us on Apple Podcasts so others can find the show, and keep checking out our YouTube page. We've been seeing some listener growth there, which is very exciting.
And with that, thanks so much for tuning in. Now let's get started.
From the Nicktoons Animation Studio in Hollywood.
Alright, our episode this week, as we said, is the 6th episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's from Book 1, it's called Imprisoned, and it originally aired on March 25th, 2005, just 3 days before my 11th birthday.
Nice. In this one, Aang, Katara, and Sokka camp near a small Earth Kingdom town where they meet a young earthbender named Haru. However, the town is occupied by the Fire Nation, and earthbending is outlawed. But Katara convinces Haru to save an old man using earthbending, only to have the same old man turn Haru in. Katara then devises a plan to save him by getting herself arrested for earthbending. When she arrives at the Fire Nation prison, which is a metal fortress that's impervious to earthbending, she finds that all the prisoners have lost hope due to their inability to bend. But Katara successfully leads a rebellion with Aang and Sokka's help by giving the earthbenders all of the coal on the fortress, and all of them are able to escape and return to their occupied towns with plans to rebel against the Fire Nation occupation, thanks to Katara's words of motivation. So, this one's a pretty emotional episode, and it really lets us see that some more of the ways that the Fire Nation are really being cruel. We know they're evil, we've heard that from episode to episode, but this is really getting into that, right? It's psychologically horrible, too.
Yeah, because the only interaction we've seen with the Fire Nation is either the cruelty they've shown to Prince Zuko, and then the cruelty that Prince Zuko has in turn shown to the Avatar and his friends. And yeah, we see them treating just like regular old people horribly, and it didn't hit me until you read that summary, but how must it feel to have your bending, which is such a huge part of who you are in this world, completely taken away? Like, there must be an identity crisis in all of that, too, and it makes sense that they wouldn't really have the will to do anything.
Yeah, it's honestly pretty soul-crushing for them, and I think the other thing, too, it's they're there specifically just because they could bend, right? Like, they're not... You know, it's not like they're prisoners because they've done anything wrong. They're just kind of sent here, and that one thing which makes them, you know, who they are is stripped down, and we see it. We see the hopelessness pretty much immediately when Katara gets in there. I guess we could back up a little bit to before they get in, which it's a pretty clever trick. There's a couple of clever moments in here, but they're sleeping by this old camp. They're talking about how they only have nuts to eat and they're getting really hungry. They see this earthbender who's immediately panics as soon as he's seen, but they're just excited because person probably means civilization, and that probably means food that is not just nuts. So
yeah, and as we see, Momo is very excited about that prospect.
I feel like hunger is a common theme in Team Avatar, at least in the beginning.
Sure
but
is. Yeah. It's like easy, cheap humor that we need in an episode like this. We need something to lighten things up.
Absolutely. And at this point too, we don't really know what's going on. We know that this kid is really panicked when Katara sees him bending, but we don't really know why. We don't really have the context right away. And they do a good job of sort of letting us into that and giving us that knowledge again without laying it down quite so strictly. They do give it to you a little bit later, but they sort of set it up well, right? Like, they follow him back to his mom's house. They mention that they saw him bending, and we can see immediately, like, his mom is upset. Then we see the Fire Nation come to their house, and we kind of put the pieces together before it's immediately laid out.
Yeah, it's a nice sort of trail of breadcrumbs they give us, and clearly nothing good is happening in this town if someone's afraid to earthbend. And I don't know, I think it's worth pointing out the pretty blatant Nazi Germany and Holocaust ties that we see in this episode, where we have these people who are targeted for no reason that other than who they are inherently, either by birth or by just this trait that they have, and they're being rounded up, and it's really striking to me, and it's really powerful and unsettling.
Yeah, and I think part of that too is kind of to draw those connections and really make you realize just how bad the Fire Nation is. I think they could have just kind of made them vaguely evil this entire show, and we would have kind of just taken their word on it, but I think they do a good job of showing the ways that, deeply ingrained in these people's lives, right? Like, they're not allowed to be who they are. They're not allowed to show who they are. They're constantly keeping their bending away, and also kind of in a similar fashion, too, we see people turning against people of their own village, right? So Haru saves this old man who's, like, under a bunch of rocks, and he saves him. And we see that night, the old man turns him in, and he says, like, that's the one I saw earthbending. And that's pretty similar too, right? People turning each other in, people going against their own villagers. Because
you have to, I sort of understand it. I think it's horrible what the old man did, but if he were to not report it, and if it were found out that he witnessed earthbending, it would be him getting rounded up too. And just the way they could use kind of mind tactics to control these people. Like, they come in, and the Fire Nation guard comes in and just says, the tariff has doubled now, or the tax has doubled, and there's nothing they can do about it. They just have to pay it. And the control tactics they use, they're truly a despotic regime, I think, by every sense.
Yeah, it's hard to watch. And even before we see the prison, it's hard to watch just the amount of fear, and again, the control that they have, really, over this entire town. And so Haru's taken away, and they come up with this clever idea using this air vent to make it look like Katara is lifting this boulder, right? Because Aang uses his airbending through the vent to sort of make it look like it's earthbending, which is actually pretty clever.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like those air traps in the Southern Air Temple, and all of the clever uses we've seen for bending throughout the show.
Yeah, it is. And we do get another bit of sort of lighter humor here, too, where we have some really just grade A quality acting, totally believable by Katara and Sokka.
Funny. Yeah, they have this obviously staged fight, but of course the Fire Nation people believe it. And Katara really gets in a bunch of sick burns about Sokka's ears. That was hilarious. She's like, he goes, "What did you call me?" And she says, "A giant-eared cretin."
Yeah, and he says, like, "You better cut that out." And then he's like, but actually, man, could you, like... Yeah, she says, "I bet elephants get together and make fun of how big your ears are." Just, like, quality lighthearted humor that we need every now and then.
And they're both, like, over-enunciating, too. It's hysterical. It's just so unnatural. Oh, but real quick, before we get further down this rabbit hole, there is a lovely moment before Haru is taken, with him and Katara, where we find out that Haru's Haru, that his dad was taken away, and Katara is able to bond with him and shows him the necklace that her mother gave her before she was killed. And it's a beautiful, even though Haru's dad is still alive, it's a beautiful moment of connection for the two of them.
Yeah, it's kind of the first moment that Katara really has some of these, like, emotional moments, connections, really. I mean, Aang's lost, like, his entire family and everything, but it's a little more personal, I feel like, between the two of them in this moment. And yeah, they do a great job too in this show of giving us characters and giving us reasons to feel for them and humanizing them in a really short time period, right? We're looking at 20-minute episodes, 20 and change minute episodes, and within the first 5 we already have sort of this sweet spot for Haru. You know, we already feel for his entire situation.
Right. And I'm going to go all English teacher-y for a second here, and, like, I just think the light and dark imagery in this show is just stunning. The way they design the lighting of this show, even though it's obviously not set with real lights like in a studio, there's so much detail and design work that goes into it. For example, when Katara says she's going to get herself turned in, there's this awesome light from all of the edges of the screen around them, and I saw it as, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I don't know if I am, that Katara is shining this light onto the earthbending people and empowering them just through her language, through her positivity, and through her, you know, she's shown as pretty naive in this episode, but it isn't just naivete that gets her through all of this. She comes up with really brilliant plans, and I think she's just the total MVP of this episode.
Yeah, she really is. There's definitely a couple of moments where a little part of me is like, come on, Katara, you gotta be a little bit more sort of understanding, I think, of what these people have been through and how it's gone for them, but she overall continues to be a really strong, really powerful character and really helps everyone get out of this miserable situation in the end.
Right. And then back to the moment we were actually discussing. Thanks for going with me on that detour. When they create this fake bending, there's a hilarious moment where the Fire Nation guard thinks that it's Momo doing the earthbending because he's standing under the lifted boulder with his arms up, and Sokka's like, "It's the girl."
Yeah, they kind of have to really
even
spoon feed it to him, yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't even, like, properly catch someone who's trying to get caught. So they are incompetent, too.
Yeah, they really are, and part of that, I think, is for the comedy. We have to assume that there's some sort of smarter masterminds behind the entire idea, right? Between the psychological warping and everything, there's obviously some people that are better, but, like, yeah, no, they're not the brightest. And I mean, even them just buying this whole stupid fight is, they're not the brightest. But we continue on forward. And truthfully, it's pretty brave of Katara to go in there and get imprisoned because...
Oh, yeah, she has no way. She doesn't know that she's gonna get out.
Yeah, and she has no reason to really feel like she should. I mean, maybe part of that, too, is just naivete, and she's not really considering the idea of her not getting out, but very well things could have could have turned in a different route, and she could have ended up stuck there, but
right. And while she's there, it's pretty heartbreaking. She gives this big speech, and the guards come out and watch because they're concerned about an uprising, and no one moves. It's like a brilliant, motivating speech, and no one even budges or changes posture. These poor people are just so defeated, and it's sad to watch, and you get a little frustrated because it's like, you've got to get out of here, but who can blame them?
Yeah, I think at some point they're like, well, what could they possibly do, right? They're stuck in this metal ship situation. They've made positively sure that there's no rocks for them. They're made to just work all day in a terrible setting. Like, how much can you be positive in that kind of a context, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. And they just see it as this kid comes in and goes, come on, through the power of positivity and will, you can get your way out of here, even though they can't bend and they've been conditioned to fear for their lives. Like, Haru's dad, Katara, finds him and is able to talk to him, and he has just the most amazing voice, by the way. I just love his voice acting on this. So deep and rich. And she goes, so what's the plan? How are we getting out of here? And he goes, the plan is to survive. I think that was such a powerful line.
Yeah, it really puts in perspective exactly where they're at this point, right? They're not really in the mood to hear Katara's speech. They're not really in the mood to try and, break out. They're kind of just getting by. And
they've presumably been there for a bit too.
Yeah, we were not really sure exactly how long, but at least a decent while. And they're just kind of broken, and I can't really blame them for not really listening to Katara's, come on guys, let's get up and do this right away. Like, I feel like, especially, she just got here. She hasn't had to live through the same pain that they've been through, right? That she doesn't really get what's going on.
Yeah, she did not read the room, that's for sure.
and you can't blame her. She's trying. She's just trying to be a hero. She is young. We do have to give her credit on that one too, but it's not immediately great. But they come up with this plan. Well, Sokka and Aang join the party, and they come up with this plan to get all of the coal through the air vents so that they can earthbend the coal. And this is another one of those things where the resourcefulness is really clever too, right? Like, yeah, they've made sure that they got rid of all of the actual stones, but they need coal for the ship to run, and that's something that they can earthbend. I just think, like, the sort of ways that they play with the materials are really fun.
Yeah, they're just so clever. They're such great problem solvers, especially Katara. And Aang doesn't always apply himself mentally, but he's always ready in a pinch. He has great critical thinking skills when it comes down to the wire. It's just when he doesn't have to, he chooses not to.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, even when they're formulating the plan to fake earthbending, Katara's like, Aang, do you know your line? Do you know when you come in? And he goes, yeah, you're taking all the fun out of this. And in a rare moment when Sokka is right and Aang is wrong, Sokka goes, we're taking the fun out of getting kidnapped by the Fire Nation.
Look,
it's a great moment.
And I think that's one of those, Aang is just so him, like, he tries to make everything lighthearted. He tries to make everything into this exciting, fun adventure, and he really doesn't. He doesn't quite feel the weight of it, I think, in the same way that Katara does.
Yeah, and in later seasons, we will see, without spoiling, we will see that become a major issue of the show, of sort of how can you have the burden of the world on your shoulders and still be like a lighthearted person at the same time.
Yeah, we'll definitely have this sort of recurring discussion. But they get the coal in, and Katara kind of goes through, and she has another one of those motivational speeches, and no one moves. They just kind of stare at her like, what do you think we're going to do? So it's just really telling, right? Like, they finally actually have some sort of resource in front of them, and you might think that immediately they'd be like, oh my god, we finally have something to bend. But they're not. They're too broken to even care, right? Like, they don't even they just don't even move. And the warden says their spirits were broken a long time ago. So it's like, what did you expect? Like, congratulations for wasting your time, stuff like this.
Yeah, he's really cruel.
Yeah, really digging into him, and then it's Haru who finally actually steps forward, right? And I think he just kind of gets a few things together, and then his dad, I think, joins in after. Is that an accurate?
Yes. Well, first, Aang and Sokka are able to get away. I don't know if we really parsed out this part of the plan, where Aang and Sokka fly away on Appa, which I raised an eyebrow at a little bit. Like, if this is some maximum security, like, how are they able to just fly away? I guess Appa, how are you going to stop him, you know?
Right.
But they report to the warden that, some people escaped. They were on a flying bison. It's like, really? It's like, yeah, a buffalo. And he goes, well, which is it, a buffalo or a bison? It's just such a Monty Python or like an airplane type joke. Totally in the middle of like nowhere. I thought that was hysterical.
Yeah, again, it's the little bits of humor that help us through.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, then he just hurls the captain over the bridge. And I don't think he dies or anything, but it's still a very scary moment.
Yeah, I mean, you can never really be sure on the exact death count within this show, to be honest with you. There's definitely some. How many are on screen is hard to tell, but still, getting thrown overboard, not a fun time.
Certainly a lower death toll than Rugrats in Paris.
Oh my god, that was horrifying.
The robot fight.
Babies just murdered people left and right.
Crushing buildings.
Honestly, I can't recover, guys, from that. Terrifying. Like, just people died. People died.
Yeah, we watched that, like, literally 2 years ago, and I'm still reeling from it. It was the first movie we ever watched.
Like, in this one, there's some ambiguity. No, people died in Rugrats in Paris. Lots of them.
Yeah, usually they'll do some, like, in Batman type stuff, they'll, like, evacuate the city, and then they can destroy everything.
No, there was just people. People's lives never forget. But anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we get the first Haru and his dad jump in, and they start, and then everyone else sort of follows suit. Sort of like power in numbers kind of a moment. And it's really great to see them, they're working together. It's the first time they felt any kind of powerful in a really long time.
Yep. Oh, Cam, meme idea. It's been a while. If I thought of this when Haru and his dad joined the battle. Well, that's a joke. when they dive in, I would love to see a Super Smash Bros. Meme with the two of them throwing coal, and it says Haru and his dad have joined the battle. I don't know. Play around with it if you want.
If you feel like dumping back into the memes, I know that's been your thing for a while, Cam. I'm sorry we abuse you for it, but
Yeah, and a video of it would be amazing, but that I might be pushing it.
But it really is this, you get this sort of thrill, right? Like, of everyone's finally fighting back. They all kind of work together. They kind of realize that they have more power than they thought. And we get, again, just a really cool battle. It's kind of a fun thing, too, because there's coal versus fire, right? Like, it's an interesting subset of materials here, which, again, I just love the fight scenes in this show because they're so creative, right? Like,
they really are. And there's storytelling in them. It's not just now we mark time for 5 minutes.
Right. No, there's storytelling. There's also, you can sort of sense the creativity of the individual benders too, right? Like, you can tell that this is a learned skill, that they've spent a lot of time really determining all the ins and outs, and that there's sort of new things that you can tell, like, maybe these people haven't ever bended coal before, but they're working with it, right? They're coming up with ways to make that happen, and it's cool to see.
Yeah, and Aang kind of cleverly creates this sort of wind tunnel that they can then throw the coal into, and then it knocks out the fire guards. That was great.
I love it.
And, like, there's something so beautiful in the choreography of watching earthbenders bend together. The way they sort of do that push and pull. Same with waterbenders, but they don't need to team up quite as much. Earthbenders, when you watch them work together, especially in The Legend of Korra and in the earthbending Avatar show that I really, really, really want, instead of this live-action thing, which I'm excited about, I wish they would just either go back to Kyoshi or go forward past Korra, but, you know, who knows? But watching earthbenders in unison, I think, is stunningly beautiful.
Yeah, and it really is the one kind of bending that is just blatantly stronger with more people, right? Like, they really have a way to work together. Waterbending sometime, airbending, obviously, we don't really have a whole lot to play on there with just Aang, and firebending is pretty much entirely a single person's game, right? Like, they might have multiple fighters, but they're not really working together to make one giant fire or anything like that.
Right, and they just, it seems counterintuitive to, like, at least the evil firebenders to actually work together like that. They're all so self-absorbed.
But, yeah, earthbending brings them together, and I think it works well in this moment, too, right? That they're all kind of, they need this community, they need this whole group in order for them to be able to do what they do.
Yeah, they all have to, because Katara can't do it on her own, none of them can.
Right.
And Haru and his dad are just the breaking point. They couldn't have done it just the two of them. They were counting on everyone else joining in, and luckily they do. And we have this great moment where they finally pin down the warden, and he says, "Please, I can't swim." They're, like, dangling over the bridge, and Haru's dad says, "Don't worry, I hear cowards float." Which might be line of the season for me so far. That's just awesome.
It's incredible. It really is. Plus his voice is just, it's so good. It's so fitting for his character, and yeah, it's, what a way for him to go down.
Yeah, his name is Kevin Michael Richardson, and he hasn't done anything huge standout. He was the Joker in the animated Batman series. He won some Emmys for that, but if you go on his Wikipedia, it's amazing. If you go to the animation section, it's like 100 shows. He's been on so many shows. Oh, and he was on Rugrats in Paris. He was the sumo singer.
Oh my god, no way.
Was he the Here Comes Chucky Chan?
We should try to get him on the show and ask him which he thinks was more traumatizing, thinking about all the deaths of Avatar or all the deaths of Rugrats in Paris, you know? That's what I want to know.
He was also the seagull in the second SpongeBob movie. Do you remember the seagull that talks?
Oh, yeah. Wild.
So yeah, lots of small roles. He usually plays villains, it seems like. But yeah, Kevin Michael Richardson, just an awesome voice actor.
He really is, and, you know, it's great to see these people become empowered again. And, you know, they're reinvigorated, they're ready to rebel against the Fire Nation, they're ready to, you know, actually go back and do this. And this is sort of the beginning we see of a movement of people actually fighting back against the Fire Nation. We have a lot of, we know that, you know, the Avatar needs to save the world somehow, but we don't really have all these individuals, all of these towns speaking up and going up against the Fire Nation so much until now. We just kind of see them being terrified. So it's good to see some power back in their hands as well.
Yeah, it's a satisfying emotional journey, and I like that they don't just teleport to wherever they need to go next. Like, they show us how big this world is, where, like, they really stumble upon this earthbending village. This is not like the Southern Air Temple where Aang says, "Guys, we have to go see this." They finished hanging out with Boomy, and then they presumably keep heading towards the Northern Water Tribe, and they're not going to make that trip in a single day, so they have to land and they have to get food, and that's where they see Haru. And it's so serendipitous, and I think that's lovely that it's not all linear of we go here next and then we go here. It's, wait a minute, who's this guy on our rest stop?
Yeah, it's and it builds out the show for a while really well, of us sort of getting them just sort of dropping into these places, but it does feel like a journey, and we do feel sort of growth amongst the characters.
It's great world building too, because we've now seen two very different earthbending Earth villages. We have Omashu, which is this kind of grand, large city, and then we have this tiny village, and they're both Earth kingdoms. So now we have a way more nuanced view of Earth Kingdom culture.
Yeah, I mean, especially at the beginning, like, you don't really know if there's just sort of 4 villages, right? There's the fire village and the water village. Like, it's...
True, yeah.
I mean, we eventually hear that there's, the northern, southern, but we don't necessarily realize that there's, an entire community, an entire subset of all sorts of people all across here, right? It is a world.
And the Earth Kingdom is enormous, at least comparatively to the rest of the globe. It's like all of North and South America, basically. Like, it's giant.
Yeah, and this does give us a good sense of it, and I do like that we always sort of, we either end on a nice, peaceful ride on Appa, or in this case, again, we do see them sort of, continuing forward. We recognize that they've completed what they've needed to get done here. But then Katara realizes that her mother's necklace isn't actually on her neck anymore, that she must have dropped it. And we get just this, it's so well done, such a perfect closing shot of Zuko just finding that necklace, and just, again, just slightly behind where they are. It's a common theme, and you can feel his anger and frustration growing. He doesn't say a word.
Looking
it's
out
just
over a cliff.
Ugh. It's so good.
And it's great because even I forgot about Zuko this episode. I didn't think about him once. I wasn't like, where's Zuko in all of this? Because the story was so interesting. They don't give you time to think about him.
Yeah,
and then you're reminded at the end, yeah, he's still on their tail. He's coming.
And they really do make you feel that closeness, and really feel that, they're being tracked. And to be fair, they're kind of letting that happen, right? They're really getting themselves in a lot of people's business. But I do think that we kind of get this growing sense of, like, the more you guys do this, the more that you get involved in these towns, the more you're going to be trackable,
True, yeah. They certainly they're going to be the talk of that village for centuries. They are not being subtle. They can't help themselves. They want to help people, and they're an interesting group. It's literally the Avatar.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot to deal with. I do like too that this is even though he does some airbending and everything, that the theme of the show, or theme of this episode, is not another, oh my god, it's the Avatar sort of a deal, right? They just kind of accept that pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's really not the thing of this episode, which I appreciate, because we've seen that a few times
Yes.
now, all the Avatar worship, and I don't know if it's ever explicitly even said. I mean, maybe Katara says it when she's trying to motivate them.
Yeah, I just mean, like, they see him airbending, presumably they can put 2 and 2 together, but that's not the important moment then, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's really not. And it's nice because Aang takes a bit of a back seat. He's a helper in Katara's plan.
Yes, which is nice to see. I'm glad that they give her time and chances to shine, because she's an amazing character and she deserves it.
Yeah, and all these characters did so well in Nick Madness with good reason. It's some of the best character writing of any show ever.
Absolutely. Is there anything else specific that you want to add on?
I don't think so. Why don't we head to your segment?
That sounds good to me. All right, guys, so my segment is about the voice actor of the Warden, which is George Takei. He is most well known for his role on Star Trek. He was Hikaru Sulu, is that how you pronounce it? The helmsman of the USS Enterprise. But what I thought was really interesting about him is that he actually, during World War II, was in an internment camp, a Japanese internment camp in the United States. And I think that, given the context of this episode, there's obviously a lot of sort of personal emotional ties, I think. I know we talked about the similarities to Germany, but obviously there's similar cases in any situation where you're held as a prisoner just for being who you are. And I think it's kind of powerful for him to, in a way, be the warden in this case, rather than just another person captured. But I was thinking, especially watching this episode, knowing that context, when he says things like their spirits were broken a long time ago, That's probably how he felt, right? But in addition, he has won several awards for his work on human rights with Japan-United States relations. He also had a Broadway show regarding his experiences in the internment camps called Allegiance, which he starred in. And I just thought it was a really interesting story and sort of grants some more personal takes into this episode. And I don't know exactly, how much he might have had insight into how things were and how that played into this episode, but I still thought it was just kind of a cool, interesting tidbit about this episode here.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. And such an interesting casting choice that it is empowering in some way, but I wonder how they approached him about that. Like, hello, will you play a warden in an internment camp?
Yeah, and I couldn't find anything about, the specific casting and how that discussion went. I was hoping that there would be something, somewhere about that, but, I mean, obviously it's something that's close to him, and I'm sure that he, felt for the situation. Definitely an interesting choice. Like I said, maybe it's somebody knew him personally and thought that he would sort of have good connections there, but what an emotional sort of feeling. And I'm sure watching that episode too, like I said, I'm sure he could feel connections to that in ways that, are hard to portray always in a children's cartoon show, which is, a downgrade on what Avatar is.
For those who may not know, too, the Japanese internment happened in the United States under FDR. And so Japanese people were rounded up out of this fear during World War II that they were somehow conspiring against the quote-unquote real Americans. So it is an unsettling thing to remember that it happened here. And Avatar doesn't go there necessarily, but they certainly are making a statement by casting him in this role.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's one of those things that is not talked about as much when we are taught about World War II. We kind of glaze over this whole U.S.-run internment camps that we had. And, it's pretty horrifying to imagine, right, that just being there again for nothing that you've really done wrong, in the same way that the Earthbenders are just, they just were born Earthbenders, and they're forced to be here. I mean, he just was Japanese. And I really appreciate that the show doesn't shy away from tougher conversations like that, because I remember this being a kind of hard one to watch when I was a kid. It really kind of depressed me in some ways, and I think it's good that it put that into the conversation, and not that it's doing anything new particularly with this topic, but that's a part of the world, that these firebenders are trying to take over the world, and they could have gone the cartoonish route, like you were saying, of just, oh, they're evil, and watch out for those Fire Nation people, they're bad, but instead we really see just how controlling and domineering they are of every society they encounter. Absolutely. And I think both, this casting choice and, like we said, just sort of the connections that we can see across other historical controlling situations, I think it does make it more powerful, and it does make it feel more real, There's no part of me that's like, oh, that wouldn't happen during this. You can feel the sense of their fear and the control and everything with that. So it's, beautiful episode. Again, it's a little weird always to go from Angry Beavers to something as serious as this, but I'm glad we had the time to dig into it, and always looking forward to watching more of this show. It is just so good. We're only 6 episodes in, and it's incredible already.
It sure is, yeah. And next week we'll get there in the conclusion, but we won't. Our episode isn't quite so funny next week in our in-between, so we'll get there.
Anyways, anything else you need to add onto that?
That's all I've got. Thanks for that find. That's all really cool.
Yeah, a little shout out there to George Takai for taking some time to be a part of this episode and, helping in some way sort of get his story told a little bit more. So, good stuff. All right, I guess let's move on forward to our conclusion, shall we?
Let's do it.
All right, our Twitter poll for this week is a little bit lighter, just to, keep things a little happier here, guys. Whose ears are more ridiculous, Momo's or Sokka's? Because we did hear, all of Katara's harsh words against them, so I'm interested to see where you guys land on this.
Yeah, there is a brief bit where Sokka, at the end of their little fake fight, turns to Momo and he says, "Your ears are ridiculous too, Momo," or something like that. So we thought we'd let the people decide. And yeah, next week we'll be looking at the Hey Arnold episode Longest Monday. We don't usually tell you what episode we're doing, but just because we've been talking about doing this one for a while, it's the Wolfgang episode with the 4th and 5th graders fighting each other, the 4th graders avoiding being thrown into dumpsters. So it'll be one of the more real Hey Arnold episodes too, in terms of bullying and just class dynamics in general.
Yeah, I remember being terrified of this concept. I didn't...
Yeah.
Because I was younger than 4th grade when I watched it, and I didn't know if bullying really reached these levels, and we'll talk it all out when we watch it, but it's a good one, guys. Looking forward to it. A little more serious, but it's a good one. As always, be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. You can find us on all of those. Happy to hear you guys on any of them.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.